Good day. Welcome to the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's web talk. Our series is Building Jewish Resilience. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director and today's moderator. CAEF is a Canadian charitable organization that is exposing Jew hatred in all its manifestations, promoting Zionism, which is a core principle for Jews, and debunking lies about Jews and Israel. We need your support, so please consider making a donation today. Our series will feature speakers who are making a difference, not only confronting Jew hatred, but defining it, refuting the lies, developing allies, and demonstrating Jewish resilience. In a word, being proud Jews and teaching us to express Jewish pride. I am really thrilled today to launch this series with a very special guest, Ben Freeman, an educator who teaches Holocaust studies at Hong Kong, and a writer who authored one of the most readable books I have ever read on anti-Semitism, with a pathway to countering it. I urge everyone to read Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People. The book is packed with information that provides a very understandable history of this evil and its ideological, religious, cultural, and geographic variants. Ben provides personal stories by Jews of varying backgrounds who have experienced Jew hatred. He brings us clearly to the perspective that we must foster a movement of Jewish pride, a most potent antidote. Ben was born in Scotland and has experienced hatred and discrimination as both a gay man and a Jew. He is an internationally renowned educator focusing on Jewish identity, combating anti-Semitism, and raising awareness of the Holocaust. Currently based in Hong Kong, you'll have to ask him about that. Ben now heads up the humanities team at an American international school and lectures on anti-Semitism at Hong Kong universities. Through his work, he aims to educate, inspire, and empower both Jewish and non-Jewish people all over the world. To quote a few reviewers of Ben's book so that you will have an appreciation of the impact of his thinking, I quote Simon Sebag Montefiore, the world-famous historian and author of Jerusalem, the biography. He said, fascinating, inspiring, and heartbreaking, a cultural and historical survey of Jewishness in the perilous, intolerant new world of the 21st century that is both exuberant and optimistic and tragic and worrying. David Hirsch, the author of Contemporary Left Anti-Semitism, said of Ben's book, what is new and fascinating in this book is Freeman's focus on Jewish responses to those external and hostile constructions of Jewish identity, self-empowering and life-affirming ways of loving being Jewish. Before Ben starts, let me just point out that the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our CAEF website, and you may use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen to submit questions for Ben. Our president, Anita Bromberg, will join us. She's standing by to read the questions following the presentation and will invite you to participate. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm very excited because this is my first event in Canada. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you all today.
You want to give us a bit of an overview of your, your thesis?
Absolutely. So my journey to writing this book, I guess I had two journeys. The first was my journey as a Jew. I was raised as a very proud Jew in Scotland. My parents worked very hard to create a very Jewish environment. And I was a proud Jew, but I never really thought about it just because it was all around me. I went to the only Jewish primary school in Scotland. So my life was very Jewish. And that really continued up until I went to university. And that was the first time I experienced kind of mass Jew hatred. And I had just come back from a gap year in Israel, and I was called a racist, a white supremacist, an imperialist, a colonialist, just because I believed in the concept of a Jewish state. And I didn't really understand what was happening to me. I knew it was offensive, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't have the language to describe it. However, at the same time, from the very same people who were rejecting me as a Jew, I felt embracement because of my status as a gay man. And that's when I came out. And my journey to LGBTQ plus pride was long and painful, like it is for so many people. And I was at rock bottom, and I realized actually I had done nothing wrong. This wasn't my fault. I was born this way and I had done nothing wrong, but I was being punished for something I was being punished for a crime I hadn't committed. And that realization led me towards LGBTQ plus pride. Now, this idea of Jewish pride specifically came to me in about 2018. So as you may know, and I actually saw a question about this already in the chat or related to this, Britain has just endured Corbynism, Labour anti-Semitism, lots of left-wing anti-Semitism. And I saw the British Jewish community do something incredible. They came together, and you know, there is this idea that Jews love to debate, Jews love to argue, but this was remarkable because we put aside all of our differences and we stood side by side to fight our common enemy, the existential threat that was Labour and Jeremy Corbyn. But I also saw particularly high-profile Jewish people who couldn't quite bring themselves to say it. They couldn't quite bring themselves to say Corbyn is a racist or Labour is institutionally racist against Jewish people. And I realized that they were suffering from what I call the hangover of the keep your head down policy, which was the unofficial policy in the Jewish world where we were just told, keep your head down, just get on with it, don't say anything. And I realized that in the LGBTQ plus community, we talk a lot about shame. It's a very common conversation, but it's not one we speak about in the Jewish world. We commemorate our dead, but we don't speak about the pain, the shame, and the trauma that is inflicted upon us. And that is my thesis. It's about getting Jews to reject the shame of anti-Jewish racism. So to recognize that, yes, while the non-Jewish world may try to shame us, we will not become ashamed. And there is a fundamental difference there between being shamed and ashamed. The second component is rejecting non-Jewish definitions of what it means to be a Jew. Just a few weeks ago in Britain, the BBC had a panel discussion, and the rolling question across the bottom of the screen was, should Jews be counted as an ethnic minority? First of all, it wasn't our Jews, which is offensive in and of itself, but should Jews be counted? There were 6 people taking part in this panel. 5 of them were not Jewish. Their perspective on our identity is illegitimate. And it's not to say that they're not allowed to ask questions, they're not allowed to be involved in discussions, but they must understand that discussions on Jewish identity should take place within the Jewish world. And then lastly, it's to empower people to begin the journey of defining themselves as proud Jews through an authentic understanding of Jewish history, experience, and values. So they're my 3 main takeaways, or my 3 main points.
Thank you. There are a number of concepts that you explore that I found really very helpful. And one that I'd like you to talk about is this question of whiteness, white passing. Jews are what? I know that in my own circle, I'm being told that I am privileged because I'm white. And I often have no idea how to respond.
I think it's a really great question. I think it's a question very much of our time, but I do think we have to acknowledge that any conversation surrounding Jewish identity that originates in the non-Jewish world, so say the left and the progressive world saying that we're white, we also have to recognize at the same time the right say we're not white. But why do they say these things? Why do they say these contradictory things? Well, they are expressions of power. That's what they perceive to be expressions of power. The left sees whiteness as power, as oppression, as supremacy. And Jews for thousands of years have been framed as privileged and powerful. So this idea that we're white is just a modern expression of a very ancient idea. And it has nothing to do with the color of our skin. It's all to do with perceptions of power. And I think that I do not identify as white. I say that I'm Jewish. And I don't actually care that much if people say that they are white. I very much care when someone else tries to tell me what I am. Either Jew or non-Jew, unacceptable. And again, I see the compassion and the empathy I'm given as a gay man. People say to me, what are your pronouns? Would you like to be referred to as a gay man, LGBTQ+? Are you queer? I'm constantly being invited, permitted, allowed, whatever it is, to define my own identity as a gay man, but never as a Jew. So I very much reject that notion. But if someone wants to say, listen, I identify as white, that's fine. I think what we need to do is widen the conversation, because the reality is that whether some Jews are white or not, it has never saved us from anti-Semitism. It's never saved us from anti-Jewish racism. What targets us manifests slightly differently. And this conversation about are light-skinned Jews white is really an expression of this very narrow, very American idea on prejudice. And actually, prejudice works in a variety of different ways. It's not just about the color of your skin. And I think it's really important that our experience is recognized. But conversations about this are never about the color of our skin. It's about a judgment on our role in society, perceptions of Jewish power. And I think ultimately Jewish people should get to define Jewish identity. And it isn't appropriate when we're told, oh, you are white. It's okay that people don't understand. It's okay that people might be confused. If someone like me, who clearly looks white, I pass as white, says, well, I'm not white. That's confusing to people. So it's okay that they ask questions. And in fact, I invite them to. But they should be asking clarifying questions, not challenging us. And these boundaries are very important for us to put up to say, no, I'm not going to engage with you if you're going to dictate my identity. And again, whether they're Jew or non-Jew, we have to learn to respect each other. But conversations about the whiteness of Jews are really, A, it erases all of the non-white passing Jews in our community, and B, they're rooted in ancient ideas about Jewish power. It's as one of my students said, it's the same soup, different bowl.
Right. You do a very good job of interviewing and presenting the perspective of Jews of color of different ethno-racial backgrounds. Can you speak about how they perceive this question in the Jewish community itself?
Yeah, it was really fascinating. So I'll speak about Elisheva Rishon. So Elisheva is a Black American Orthodox Jewish woman. She grew up in Crown Heights, a very, very religious family. And we had discussions, and actually in her interview, she said this. She said, I hope you notice that at no time in this conversation have I said white Jew. And I thought it was really powerful because I think, firstly, she may or may not have seen my take on this. So this was just respectful because it's about recognizing what I would like to be referred to as. But she also said, she was like, no Jew is white. There are Jews who can pass as white, but that is not a privilege. And I think this is the major misconception. Passing as something is not a privilege. It's just another manifestation of oppression. So when we as Jews can pass as non-Jews, what we're really basing that experience on is the understanding that it's good to pass as not Jewish. It's really bad to be Jewish, and we want people to think that we are not Jewish because of all the shame and pain that's imposed on us. And Elisheva and other non-white passing Jews in the book. So Elisheva, Ashagar Araro, who's from the Bet Israel, Ethiopian Jewish community, Isaac de Castro, who is Sephardic, or rather he's mixed Ashkenazi and Sephardic. He does not pass as white at all. And they all say the same thing, say there are different experiences, and a light-skinned Jew will have a different experience than a Black Jew in certain situations, but that does not make them white. It's about nuance and complexity and understanding that often what people try to do with Jewish people and Jewish identity is put a square peg into a round hole. We cannot be understood through the experiences of other people.
What I did think was interesting is that all of the people you interviewed, 6 or 7 people of different backgrounds, all shared the experience of anti-Semitism, whether they were a Jew of color or not. Is there anything that you can draw? What's the line you can draw that was comparable? What was it that they most often experienced?
It was really just major othering. And I think everyone always asks me to choose between my favorite interviewer or my favorite interviewee. And they're like my children, I'm not going to do that. But the thing I will say that I learned from them is that no matter where a Jew was, whether it was Algeria or America or England or Egypt and anywhere in between, we basically faced versions of the same thing. So we faced legal segregation, legal persecution, ethnic cleansing, genocide, forced conversion, cultural genocide. And this was very common. It's a common across the world. If you look at the Ethiopian Jewish experience, it's what they experienced. Same as Sephardic Jews, same as Jews in England in 1290, same as Jews all over the world. And I think what that points to is that there is a global problem. And the Jerusalem Declaration, some of you may be aware of this, was just published. It was another alternative definition to anti-Jewish racism. And I came out very strongly against it, as many people did. And I think people who, it's terrible, basically. But what they're living in is a fantasy.
And it's written by Jews.
It's written by many Jews and they're living in a fantasy. But what we have to do is base our understanding of our reality, on the patterns that exist. So that's why I say things like the non-Jewish world hates Jews. Not, of course, not meaning individual non-Jewish people, but talking more about the ideology, cultural norms, social norms. But I think we can evidence that. You can evidence the fact that whether a Jew lives in Ethiopia or England, they experience versions of the same thing. And that tells us something very powerful.
In North America, we've been lulled into complacency and comfort, and we believe that anti-Semitism doesn't exist here. Even though this past summer, we've all decided that racism exists, most Jews don't believe there is anti-Semitism here. And since the 50s, we've been welcome. So how do you explain what's really going on? And what is it that Jews are resisting that they can't see it?
So I think this is an absolutely fascinating question. And it also was one that terrifies me, because I think that people in North America, Jews in North America, are burying their heads in the sand. There is a perception of North American Jewish exceptionalism, that Jews in North America, their experience is unlike any other Jewish community. And that experience is one of integration, one of acceptance, one of really being able to thrive without the threat of anti-Jewish racism. And I'm here to say that's actually just not true. And again, it's all about evidence. And actually, the North American Jewish experience is not totally dissimilar to the French Jewish experience in the 19th century, also the German pre-Holocaust, the British Jewish community's experience pre-Corbyn. We all have these periods, or we've all had these periods in the West, particularly post-Holocaust, where we were allowed to integrate, we were more welcomed. But the idea that these countries were ever free of anti-Jewish racism is just not true. And I think particularly in North America, it's particularly dangerous because there are other people who are othered. And of course there are in places like Europe, but actually in Europe, Jews are probably the ultimate other, the ultimate, the group that experiences the most intense, most continuous forms of oppression. Whereas in America, there's many groups. You have indigenous people, you obviously have the Black community. All of these different communities experience real systemic hate. And this again goes back to the conversation about the color of Jews' skin, because many Jews can pass, because there has been a seeming period of acceptance, a lot of Jews have thought, oh, it's fine. And actually they've believed the myth, and it is a myth. There is no American Jewish exceptionalism. It is the same thing that happened in France and Germany and other places. And we have to look at what happened in those places eventually. We have to start learning from our experience collectively. And also to understand that it's rising in North America. On college campuses in North America, it is frightening. And, you know, just today, your time, a couple was attacked in a New York park. They were slashed in the face, and Orthodox Jews are being attacked continuously. So we have to start basing our understanding of our reality on reality, looking at the evidence. It's not about hyperbole, it's about evidence. And the evidence tells us North America is going the same way that other parts of the world have gone with regards to Jews. And actually, it shouldn't really be a surprise.
No, and certainly the statistics for the last few years have been the evidence, have given us evidence that the rate of anti-Semitism has increased and that Jews are the primary target or the largest target of hate crimes. So how do you explain this crazy idea that a very small number of Jewish people, I think your book says 14.5, and I would say there's a few more than that because we'd count all these small, newly rising communities across Asia and Africa. Maybe we're at 15 now. But there are 2.4 million Christians and 1.9 billion Muslims. So what are they afraid of? What kind of control can this small population have? What's our power?
You're right. I think I say in the book this 14.7, but I guess that number is constantly in flux. But yes, you're right. It's tiny, especially in comparison to the other kind of major communities. And it isn't even just Christianity or Islam, because we're not just a religious group. It's also Latin people or Asian people or Black people. We're a tiny minority, even positioned against those statistics. It's about perceptions of Jewish and non-Jewish identity. And this really explains why anti-Jewish racism has lasted and persisted as long as it has. Because actually it's a bit mad that something that existed 2,000 years ago is still an issue for us today. And we kind of just accept that because that's just the way things are. But actually, if we've taken a little bit of a step back, that's quite strange. But the answer, I believe, lies in the fact that early non-Jewish communities, so I'm talking about early Christianity and early Islam specifically, they defined their identities against Jewish people. So let's look at early Christianity. Early Christians said the Jews are physical, we're spiritual. Why did they say we're physical? Well, because we circumcise our men. That's a physical act, whereas they say we don't need to do this, our connection is directly with God. So you're physical, we're spiritual. The Jews are material, we're heavenly. It was constantly the fact that Jews were used as this kind of point to define non-Jewish identity. Then they started to assign us specific purposes. So St. Augustine of Hippo said, the Jews are the blind man in the mirror. What did he mean by that? What are we blind to? Well, we were blind to the path of Jesus. And he said, slay them not, but scatter them. Scatter them was like, okay, oppress them, you can like beat them up, that's fine, but don't slay them because we need them. We need Jewish people because Jewish people act as a reminder to the Christians of what happens when you stray away from Jesus' path. Now, these ideas were just developed over many hundreds of years, and they were integral to the founding of Christianity. And let's talk about Europe, North America. Even though after the Enlightenment, the power of the church was greatly reduced, there was a thing that I refer to as cultural Christianity. That even though the institutions themselves were no longer there, the cultures they promoted, the ideologies they promoted were so deeply embedded that they remained. Let's look at Karl Marx, who was someone very much of the 19th century. He said that when a Christian becomes a capitalist, they become a Jew because of what Jews represent. This has nothing to do with us as individuals. It's nothing to do with us as individuals. It's all about non-Jewish perceptions of Jewish power. And it was about the fact that they defined their identities against us. And we see it today. People define themselves as progressive through anti-Zionism. So they say you cannot be anti-racist if you're not anti-Zionist. This is a continuation of this ancient idea. And then we have specific categorizations of anti-Jewish racism, which have contributed to the fear of Jewish power. So the idea that Jews are wealthy, the idea that the Jews are the symbol, the center of evil, that we're conspiring against people. So all of these have created us as basically the ultimate boogeyman or bogeyman.
You used the phrase in the book, the fascism of the modern day progressives. And I think you just alluded to some of that, but what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, I think that they're fascist. I think that they force you to think a certain thing. And actually, that is not what liberalism is. That's not progressivism. Progressivism is having space to debate and discuss. And in the 1980s in Britain, they used to have these kind of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, but for people who were prejudiced. And people would come and say, I feel like I'm suffering from this issue. Let's unpack it. Let's talk about it. But that is not the way it is now. If you don't fall in line, you're cancelled. And cancelled isn't just having your platform online removed. It can be you're fired. It can be you're forced out of your job. You lose friends. And I think that we have to get back to a place where we're allowed to disagree with each other. And populism, which all of this is a part of, you know, the polarization of politics, the polarization of culture, where either you're left or you're right. That's, again, not really in reality. And we have to allow dissent. And unfortunately, one of the prevailing views in the progressive world is that Jews are powerful, Israel is a white supremacist colonialist state, and if you disagree with that, then you can no longer consider yourself to be progressive. And that is just mad.
We need a new word, don't we? Progressive is no longer a word we can use.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we do, but I also think that we can reclaim it. We can define progressivism in whatever way we want, rooted in actual progressive values. And yes, there's complication because people might think we're talking about something else. But the fact that we have been forced out of these spaces is quite astonishing and quite frightening.
I have one more question before I ask Anita to call on people from, or read the questions from the audience. You speak and you spoke of how Christianity and I guess Islam both distinguish themselves as being not Jewish because they both came after Judaism. And how do you explain why some faiths actually have never been, as far as I know, anti-Semitic? Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, Confucianism, in countries like China and India, and I've traveled to both, there really was no historic anti-Semitism. There is today, but there wasn't that for 1,000 years.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And living in Hong Kong, this is not a place that has a huge amount of anti-Jewish racism. I guess, you know, the world has got smaller and all of these areas were colonized. So colonizing European powers brought them over here in part. And also the internet. We're starting to see a lot of kind of, you know, Hindu supremacy in India, and we're starting to see anti-Jewish racism from India and certain parts of Asia. And that can also be contributed or attributed rather to the world is getting smaller. We have an internet now. We can all engage with each other. Israel has become again, as the Jew was the ultimate boogeyman, Israel is now the ultimate boogeyman. It's the collective Jew, and it is representative of all evil. And you see this, I think I quote this in the book, at least I did it during one of the drafts, this Indian person who had nothing to do with any of the conflict with regard to Israel and the Palestinians was talking about Zios, which is actually a white supremacist term that now the left have adopted. So what we've seen with the internet is a cross-contamination. So it's spreading all over the place, and left from the right, the Islamic world, many different worlds, and it's becoming indistinguishable from one another. That's why I say that constantly talking about left or right anti-Jewish racism is a bit reductive. We have to just understand it before we start talking about the people expressing it. But the internet has offered us amazing opportunities like this. I'm living in Hong Kong, I'm from Scotland, and I'm speaking to all of you fine people, but it's also offered people who hate us opportunity to spread their hate.
I guess that was true really before the internet, because between fascism and communism, there was little distinction, maybe just in the ways in which they persecuted Jews. I'm now going to ask Anita to unmute, and perhaps you've got questions you can bring us from the audience, Anita.
Hi, thanks, Ben, very much. I've shared certainly Andrea's reaction. I too have had the privilege of reading through your book, and it's clear, it's concise, and it's insightful. And our listeners here have also commented. For example, one attendee said that she's only at chapter 2, but she can't wait to get to the rest of it. She's so impressed. So thank you, because the clarity of the thoughts you put in there are resonating with our attendees. So I will ask each of the questions, but where they seem to parallel, I'll combine them. First question is, why do you think American Jews, and I'll add Canadian, are oblivious to what's going on around us? I suppose you might want to ask, do you agree with that statement that they're oblivious? One of our other attendees say that he thought that people are quite aware of anti-Semitism today, but he asks, why are we so oblivious to what's going on, and why are they more interested in politics than fighting anti-Semitism?
So I think that there is definitely an increasing awareness. You're starting to see this across the whole of North America. Organizations like this one and all of the other organizations sponsoring this event, there's a huge amount of student groups kind of popping up. There is a general idea that it's still okay in America. And even someone said to me, they were like, oh, it's finished in Europe, but it's okay in America. And I was like, I don't know if that's the case. I don't think you can make that statement about one and not the other. I think that Jews in North America, many of them have bought into the idea that American Jewish exceptionalism, and look at America. America was kind of the land of milk and honey in a sense, and it's not true. It's never been true. There has never been a time in American history that anti-Jewish racism has not been expressed. And maybe it wasn't expressed in the same way that other forms of hate were expressed, but it still was there. And we're not in competition with each other. So you can have systemic hate against Black people, against Indigenous people, but you can also have it against Jews simultaneously. One does not cancel out the other. And I think that some people think that it does, that, oh, well, we're not as persecuted. But what they unfortunately have done is forgotten, A, their historical experience and also the global experience. We're part of one Jewish family, Am Echad. However, there are Jews in North America who are very privileged. And actually, I really hate the word privilege, and I prefer to use advantage and disadvantage, but they are privileged in the sense that they're North American, so they don't necessarily feel that they have to think about these issues. But then what they do is they abandon Jews who do. They say, okay, we don't need Israel, so therefore Israel shouldn't exist. That is enormously selfish and arrogant and callous. And I think that every Jewish community in the diaspora needs to wake up. And I've got to say, these are not just issues in North America. They're similar in South Africa. I did a book launch there, and there are similar issues there. And I think that often these issues arise when the greater context is similar to America or North America. So North America or South Africa. So there is another other who is persecuted that makes Jews feel unable to think, talk, or care about their own experience. But that's shame. We're allowed to talk about our own experiences. We're allowed to advocate for other communities, but we have a responsibility to talk about our own experience. And I think this idea that Jews, light-skinned Jews specifically, are a white privileged minority is incredibly inaccurate. And we've also seen the same ideas with the Asian American community. They were referred to as the model minority, and look what's happening to them. These things don't exist. We have to wake up. We have to understand the reality of our situation and understand the global threat that is taking place. This week, we had Jews attacked in a park in New York, and Yemen has been ethnically cleansed of Jews. And in Britain, they had that program about Jewish identity. This is a global problem, and Americans and North Americans, as a non-North American, I will say this, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but people need to step outside their bubbles. There's a much bigger picture happening here that we all need to wake up to.
I wonder if you could address the issue of dual loyalty. It's used to damn Jews, but if we say we support Zionism, we support the right of the Jewish people to a national homeland and national identity. My question is, what's wrong with dual loyalty? Why can we not care about both countries, the one of our citizenship and the one that we love as our homeland?
Yeah, I think actually at the root, there's nothing wrong with it. It's what is inferred when someone says dual loyalty. So what they mean is that we are conspiring against the country we're living in, be it Canada or Britain, to support Israel. That's what the Jews in Britain were accused of doing with Corbyn. So it's not really this idea, oh, you can care about multiple countries. Many people do. Many people do. Many people have dual heritage. Many people have mixed heritage. Many people are immigrants, refugees, and they will still care about the country of their origin or their indigenous land. But only for Jews are we accused of dual loyalty. Why? Because it's the same story. It's the same accusation of Jewish power. And it's not just, okay, the Jews are powerful, but we're always conspiring. We're nefarious. We're evil. And that really is what it's saying. We cannot love Israel and love Britain because we're inherently untrustworthy. So we must be up to no good.
I saw one of the questions here that I think is very important, is you spoke of it right at the beginning. Can you explain to people what is different from in the Jerusalem Declaration and this Nexus Declaration from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of Semitism, which we support?
So IRA is the right one, basically, as you guys support it also. The Jerusalem Declaration is a fantasy. It is very politicized, and I think it's designed to allow people to be anti-Semitic, to be anti-Jewish. And this is the reason we basically see people being against IRA, because they don't like the fact that they're going to fall foul of IRA. They don't want to be able to say, oh, this document says that I'm a racist. And I think that is something very prevalent in this Jerusalem Declaration. It also ignores anti-Jewish racism on the left. It says it exists, but it says it's not as bad, which I think is an odd thing to try and quantify. And then it says certain things about, it says opposing Zionism as a national movement is not inherently anti-Semitic. Yes, it is. It is inherently anti-Semitic. And what's more, it's not living in reality. It says, perhaps supporting a binational state is an option. And you're like, okay, yes, maybe in a fantasy land, but we're not living in a fantasy land. We're living in the real world, and we know what happens to Jews when they've lived in Arab countries. So no, that is not an option for us. Saying that BDS is not inherently anti-Jewish, and actually in a way they're right. It is not inherently anti-Jewish to boycott Israel if you're going to boycott every other country in the world. Every other country, including Canada, United States of America, Britain, many others. But again, that's not reality. That's not what is happening. What is happening is that Israel is treated as the collective Jew. It is singled out and made a pariah state. It's the collective Jew, which is exactly the way we are treated, Israel is treated. So you have to base, I keep saying, your understanding of our world and reality. You cannot base it on your fantasy version, especially when your fantasy version is rooted in trying to excuse people, from my perspective, who are being anti-Jewish. And also, there are people who have been accused of being anti-Jewish who signed it. So I don't take their word for it. I think I'd rather speak to Jewish academics. And also, there's a difference between a Jewish academic and a Jewish academic, or rather an academic on anti-Jewish racism or the Holocaust. And I think a lot of these people are not actually academics on Jewish issues. Some of them may be, but a lot of them are just academics and they've signed it. And quite frankly, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they know anything about this. And quite clearly they don't.
Anita, do you have other questions you want to bring
Oh,
forward?
yes, our attendees are full of good questions. Picking up on the question that I put before about why the interest in politics, in contrast, we see here in Canada a number of the more left groups, if you will, Green Party is one, and the NDP are flirting with motions and concepts around the boycott movement against Israel. And so one of our attendees is asking, why do you think that this kind of space is being made for anti-Israel politics, and how do we counter it, and how does it relate to your concept of a movement for Jewish pride?
Well, I think it really originates in the Soviet Union. And this is what people don't realize, is that when they express anti-Zionist rhetoric on the left, they are expressing Stalinist propaganda, which is pretty insane, to be honest. Of course, there was anti-Zionism pre-1948, but the anti-Zionists pre-1948 were against the idea of a state. That's very different. And someone said at the very bottom, no one questions Canada's right to exist. Precisely. It's only Israel. And questioning the right of a country that does exist, whether it exists, is something different entirely. And it was created in the Soviet Union. They wanted to find a way to persecute Jews without associating themselves with the Holocaust, with Nazism, which they fought. So they created this very powerful propaganda machine. And in 1975, they won the propaganda war and got the United Nations General Assembly to pass a resolution that Zionism was a form of racism.
I have to grab this question. I believe.
Let me just finish 2 seconds.
Oh, sorry.
They're the ideological roots. That is the ideological roots of all of this. So when people today are talking about anti-Jewish racism or anti-Zionism on the left, that is the roots of it. It's about this imposing onto Israel as the Jewish state all of the tropes applied to Jews as an individual. So Israel is inherently shifty, it's inherently untrustworthy, it's inherently evil, it's inherently oppressive, and that is racist. Because the only reason that's being said is because it's Jewish. So it all comes back to Stalinist propaganda. And I guess the way we combat it is by loudly and proudly stating our case. We're not going to beg for allyship, but we're going to understand that we're allowed to advocate for ourselves. We're allowed to raise our voices to talk about our own experiences, and we're allowed to defend our own values. So I think that's how we do it. But I guess we have to also recognize that we cannot force the non-Jewish world to see this.
Well, then perhaps a related question to that is, unless Andrea, you want to jump in, but there's a question about why do you think anti-Semitism is so prevalent in the Black community in the United States? I imagine they're thinking of the likes of a certain Christian Black leaders in the community that are openly spouting anti-Semitism and encouraging their followers to pick up on that. Why do you think that is?
So I wouldn't necessarily say that so much of the Black community is anti-Jewish. I mean, I just don't know how we would quantify that, to be honest. Right. But the reality is that actually Black people are just as likely as non-Black people to be prejudiced. We have this perception of minorities, all minorities, that because they're oppressed or because they're perceived as being oppressed, therefore they couldn't possibly be oppressive. And actually, that's just not the way the world works. So a Jewish person can be anti-Black, can be anti-gay, and a Black person can be anti-Jewish and anti-gay also. So that is firstly, I think, something very important to say. And I don't think it's all of the Black community, because I think we see a lot of allyship from the Black community. But I also think it goes back to perceptions of power. We have been framed as being white and powerful and privileged, and we're often blamed and scapegoated for the problems of the world. So the Black community, I think, have been told that we are responsible for their problems. Louis Farrakhan said the Jews are responsible for the slave trade, we financed it. And then again, it goes back to the Soviet Union. Angela Davis, the famous Black American civil rights campaigner and author, she was allied with the Soviet Union. The CIA, I guess, estimated that in 1971, 5% of the Soviet propaganda budget was dedicated to supporting Angela Davis. So there was a real ideological marriage here. So we also see, because of that, the idea that Israel and the Palestinians are another version of white versus black in America. So the Palestinians are black and the Israelis are white. So we see a lot of this, that being imposed on to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. But we have to be really clear, that's cultural colonialism. I don't care who you are, I don't care what your community is. If you're going to impose your experience onto another experience happening thousands of miles away that you know nothing about, that's cultural colonialism. So I think that idea that the Palestinians are black is very problematic in this sense. And also just general ideas of Jewish power, but I don't think they're any more likely to be anti-Jewish in any other part of society, I have to say.
And we certainly have had examples here within our own organization with strong allyship from the Black community. So I think that's a fair statement.
I wanted to grab this question because I have a feeling, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I see David Brody, who wrote a book himself, if this is the David Brody, and you might be familiar with it, Ben, and I love this question. He points out the Chinese Jews assimilated, that is Jews in China assimilated, and were basically seen to be absent for a long time, although now there is an emerging community and China has been suppressing it. But he asks, do we need anti-Semitism for Jewish survival?
You know, I think it's such an interesting question. And I think it's certainly, we have to be very honest here, I think it certainly is one of the reasons we have survived as a people for 5,000 years, 2,000 of them in exile, or we became a wholly exiled diasporic people. So I think it has played its role. But I don't think it's the only part of it. And I don't know even if that's such a bad thing. It's natural and normal for us to kind of understand our identities in relation to what's happening around us and in relation to the experiences we have. So I think it's, to an extent, it's okay. And also, I don't know what we would necessarily do about it. But I also don't think it's just that. You know, we as Jewish people often talk about the fact that we've survived and how resilient we are. And we say, you know, the Persians, the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, the Soviets, the Nazis, where are they all now? They don't exist, and we still exist. We're still here. But that's not an accident. We didn't exist. We don't exist by accident. We existed because we're committed to Jewish life. We developed cultures. We created new languages, new cultural practices. So I think there's also just an aspect of Jewishness that we are deeply committed to Jewish life. And I mean, and people hate that about us because they call us the obstinate Jews. But I do probably think that, yes, external pressures have galvanized Jewish identity. And I'm going to be honest, clearly Jewish pride is also a response to that. Why would we need a pride movement if there was nothing challenging our identities, if there was nothing shaming us? So we are shaped by the world around us. But I do think that solely basing Jewish pride or Jewish identity on the persecution that we receive. I know some Jewish people say they feel Jewish because of the Holocaust. And I understand that to an extent, but I think that being the whole story is very sad. I think that there's so much more to us than what is imposed onto us. We as a people are remarkable and resilient and creative and inspiring and wonderful, in spite of, regardless of what is done to us. So I think that both can kind of coexist at the same time. But I think, unfortunately, the anti-Jewish racism probably does impact the galvanizing of Jewish identity.
Jan Carr spoke about the fact that most education about Jews is really Holocaust education, and therefore it suggests that, you know, our problem began with World War II and we've overcome it and we just need to keep remembering those dead. Obviously, that's not true. Your book makes a very strong point for going back much, much further in history. The other thing that Elian Carr says, and I want to have you react to it, is that what we're not teaching is what he calls philo-Semitism. So we teach Holocaust education, we hardly teach any Jewish history, and then we don't teach what's positive about Jews. Do you agree? And what would you include in that? How would you teach that?
Yeah, I do agree. And I have to say that I take quite a strong position, unsurprising, that actually we have failed. Jewish education has been a bit of a disaster in the last 50 or so years. And it's not necessarily that I judge the people who were educating. I understand why their focus was on the Holocaust so much, and I understand why the focus became what it became. And I want to say, I'm a Holocaust educator. I'm in the middle of teaching a 3-month class on the Holocaust right now. So this is not me for 1 second erasing or diminishing the incredible importance that that has. It's incredibly important and we should talk about it. But what I mean is the sole focus on it has led people to really misunderstand their identity. The fact that there are Jews in many parts of the world who only understand our identity through a religious lens, I find to be baffling. We are not, and we have never been, just a religion. We are a people. Am Yisrael, the Jewish people. We're a nation, we were a civilization, we're an ethnicity, we're connected by shared ancestry, many of us. So this idea that we're just a religion is false. It's just not true. It's historically inaccurate. There are reasons why we began to identify in that way. But the fact that there are Jews today who are just finding out that we're an ethno-religion or a people or a nation shows that actually we have not done a good enough job with regards to education. We need to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, what is important? And it's, I'm a teacher, so it's like planning a curriculum. I've taught this Holocaust class every year I've been at this school, and every year, the teacher I teach it with, we sit down and say what worked, what didn't work. We need to kind of reflect and review what impact is the education we're providing having? Is it worthwhile? Has it been productive? What are trends we see emerging? What are things that we think are important to talk about? So for me, one of the most important things to talk about is who we are as a people. Jews should know what we are, not what the non-Jewish world says we are. So I do think we need to reclaim our narrative, and particularly with regards to education. And we need to also, as you said, put the Holocaust in its proper context. My course began in ancient Egypt, and the kids were like, what? Why are we talking about ancient Egypt? I was like, because this is where some of the trends that eventually led to the Holocaust began. We have to understand historical context. And we have to also understand that it did not end in 1945, that we as a people continued to grow, evolve post-Holocaust, as did anti-Jewish racism.
Anita, do you want to take the next? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this next question might flow from that. There were a couple of questions about well, let me put it this way. You talk about the failure perhaps of education within the Jewish community. A couple of the questions are raising how our mainstream major Jewish organizations are doing in terms of promoting Jewish pride, countering anti-Semitism. The question is focusing perhaps on action items. Do you believe it's worth our time and energy to lobby these organizations? What would be meaningful talking points if we were going to reach out to them? How do you think we're doing, and what can we do better?
So I think that there are a number of really fantastic organizations all over the world, but I think many of the organizations are devoted to combating anti-Jewish racism. And I have to say, I say this very clearly in my book, anti-Jewish racism is not a Jewish problem. And I know some people find that to be a baffling statement, but let me explain. It is a problem that originates in the non-Jewish world, and it's a problem that impacts us, but it is not our problem. And I think that a lot of organizations misunderstand that, and they think that it is our problem, it is our responsibility to break it down to defeat anti-Jewish racism. And the reality is, it isn't and it can't be. We don't hate ourselves. And even though there are Jews with internalized anti-Jewish racism, and that's a different conversation, we don't hate ourselves. It's that we are hated. So to solve a problem, you have to understand it at its root. You have to understand its origins, which in our case is in the non-Jewish world. So what we should be doing is raising our voices up to advocate for ourselves. Of course, we do play a role in combating anti-Jewish racism. We share our experience, we dialogue. But I do think we need to kind of temper our sole focus of combating anti-Jewish racism with building a Jewish pride movement, making sure that Jewish people are properly educated, making sure that Jewish life continues to grow and evolve, and make sure that it's rooted in our past. So I do think that it's worth lobbying different organizations, but I also think that at one point they're just going to have to do it, as in focus on Jewish pride, as well as, raising their voices about anti-Jewish racism, to remain relevant. And we're starting to see a change in the Jewish world, and social media. We spoke about this earlier. The internet has offered us an unbelievable opportunity. I'm sitting in Hong Kong speaking to all of you now. I tweeted earlier from my bed. I'm given an opportunity to have a voice, and I also have over 10,000 followers. And there's many people with many, many, many more followers than me who are all saying similar things. So for these institutions to remain relevant, they're going to have to get with the program. And obviously they have expertise and they have experience, which is deeply important. So it's not a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We need both. We need the institutions, we need the establishment, but we also need kind of the new voices. We need these new messages. And obviously there's many Jewish organizations that do promote Jewish pride. But I do think it's about being explicit and saying, no, we're proud of being Jews. There is so much more to us than the prejudice that we have experienced, and we're going to celebrate that. And we're not going to keep our heads down. We're not going to be silent, but that is also not going to become our primary focus. And it's difficult because look what's happening all around us. So you have to find a balance. And I don't necessarily have the right answer, because I guess in every single place it changes. But I believe that Jewish pride leads us to understand that we can raise our voices up, and we don't always need to do it in a diplomatic way. We don't always need to be political. Sometimes we can just say, no, that is unacceptable, and we're not going to tolerate this. And I think that we need, a holistic approach, which encompasses all different perspectives. It's not just no anti-Semitism, only Jewish pride. We need elements of both. But absolutely, for them to remain relevant, they're going to have to get with the program, because there's enough of us now talking about it and leading the conversation who are not in the establishment.
There seem to be two concepts that attract young people away from Zionism per se, and that's tikkun olam, or social justice. And we're seeing a lot of young people, particularly those on campus, that if they haven't been attacked by anti-Semites, are somehow drawn in to joining social justice movement. It feels good. What have we got to counter that? What have we got that's equal to that? What have we got that can attract them away from the leftist social justice?
And may I add that that picks up on a couple of questions. How do we counter this seeming attraction to young people to groups that are openly anti-Zionist? Is that a reflection of ineffective message around Jewish pride?
Well, I think we combat it through Jewish pride and everything that encompasses. So it's about making these young people, and specifically young people, making them understand, or helping them understand, who we are as a people. We're not what you've been told. We're not what you're told by the non-Jewish world. We're an ethno-religion. We're a nation. We're a people. So what does that mean? Let's unpack it. Then we have to kind of offer different routes, I think, to Jewishness. I'm not religious. I'm not really observant, but I do Jewish things, because for me, that's how I engage with our peoplehood. So we are very lucky that we actually have multiple routes to the same end. So it's about kind of offering that to young people and not saying, okay, this is the only way you have to be Jewish. Because actually there's many ways to be Jewish. We all express our Jewishness differently. We all express our Jewish pride differently. And I think it's important to have honest conversations rooted in evidence, rooted in fact. And, tikkun olam, let's be honest, the version we see today is a bastardization of what it actually was meant to be. It's not actually about social justice. And it's okay to support other communities, and that's a really good thing to do, but it should not come at the expense of our own experience. It should not come at the expense of our own community. So it's about having education, having conversations which say all this. And I think just being unapologetically proud. I receive messages from people every day saying, thank you for making me proud of being Jewish. I'm starting to think about my internalized anti-Jewish racism. I'm starting to unpack all of this. And it's about not being judgmental, understanding that we're a tiny minority and that we're dealing with much bigger communities, much bigger power dynamics. It's not equal, even in Canada. The Jewish community is not equal in power dynamic to Canadian culture, wider Canadian culture, nor is it in Britain, because we're such a small minority. So it's about, recognizing that fact and offering people space and exploring it and saying, listen, this is not your fault. This is something that's happened to you because of all of this other stuff, but let's talk about it. And letting people really understand anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish racism did not begin with the Holocaust. Anti-Zionism is anti-Jewish racism. It is anti-Semitic, and being quite clear in our boundaries, but also be willing to have the conversations. And I guess all of this comes down to education, but also leaders and role models. And now there's a few of us who are online, who are speaking, who are young, who are very, very proud of being Jewish, but also will have challenging conversations in the Jewish community. We'll talk about LGBTQ plus phobia. We'll talk about misogyny. It's not that we're saying that the Jewish community is perfect. We're saying it's not perfect, but we're proud of it anyway. And actually, we believe that the roots to solving all of these problems lie in our Jewishness. The problems don't lie in our Jewishness, but the solutions do.
So picking up on another set of questions, I know we're running short of time, so I apologize to the attendees that might not be able to get to all the questions. But we're doing our best, and it's been a fascinating discussion. I know that a lot of the questions could be answered by reading your book, another plug. What's the right term? Seems to be a question that people are asking. Jewishness, so they're quoting Daniel Boren, who says that Jewishness disrupts the very categories of identity that we have in our world today. So how do we deal with it? Is anti-Semitism racism? Is it different than racism? What do we use the term end Jew hatred, which is something we're using at CAEF, or should it be anti-Jewish racism? Is there a right word? Is there a wrong word? What's your preference? I know that in the book you come from an examination of how anti-Semitism is inherently systemic in nature. But what's the right word when we're talking about it that perhaps leads us to an action item?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I also think that it's important to name something properly so that we understand it. I think there's many good terms. I do not think that anti-Semitism is a good term, because anti-Semitism itself is inherently racist. It was created by racists. It was created in 1879 in Germany by Wilhelm Marr, and it was an attempt to legitimize, intellectualize, modernize traditional Jew hatred, which in German was Judenhass. So it became anti-Semitism, which was making it sound like a legitimate ideology, right? You have liberalism, you have modernism, you have socialism, and you have anti-Semitism. It's just another ism. And it was rooted on racist ideas about pseudoscience and linguistics. And they said that if people spoke a Semitic language, like Hebrew, then you can infer certain things about their biology. So we're biologically inferior because we spoke Hebrew. There are not Semitic people. There are Semitic languages, but not Semitic people. So the whole thing, I think, is racist. And yes, there was this attempt to move away from the hyphen. So instead of it being anti-hyphen Semitism, it just became one word. But even that's not, I don't think, good enough. And it's not to criticize those who came before. It's just about always advancing the conversation. I believe that anti-Jewish racism, obviously, I just said the word, is a form of racism. And the reason I say that is that it's never about our actions. It's never about our theology. It's never about our thoughts. It's about specific characteristics imposed onto us because we're Jews. So we are inherently shapeshifters. We're inherently untrustworthy, inherently dangerous, inherently immoral, inherently. So being Jews, therefore, we're inherently judged. So I believe that makes it a form of racism. And I think that, you know, I come from Europe where this is not a controversial position. And people kind of float between anti-Semitism, Jew hatred, anti-Jewish racism. But I do think, again, it's part of the conversation about widening our general perspectives on these issues. Anti-Black racism is not the only type of racism. You, of course, have anti-Asian racism, anti-Latin racism, anti-many different types of racism. And I think that also anti-Jewish racism. And even, listen, I mean, if I'm writing a tweet or if I'm writing my book, I'm not going to continuously call it the same thing over and over again because it just reads badly. So I will, in the book, I do say anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish racism and Jew hatred. So I think that anti-Jewish racism, Jew hatred, Jew hate is, they're all kind of good. But I do think it's important to kind of position our experience, especially in the world that we're living now, alongside what's happening to other people. Not to compare, not to contrast, not to say that ours is worse, not to say certainly that theirs is worse. But I do think it's important to help people understand, okay, this is a form of racism. So when I receive death threats online, which I do, and I tell my friends, my non-Jewish friends here who are incredibly supportive, they might say, oh, those people are so ignorant. And I go, no, they're racist. They're saying this to me just because I'm a Jew. And I think it's important to understand that. This is not just ignorance. It's not just, there's no legitimacy in anti-Semitism. And I think whether you want to call it Jew hatred or Jew hate or anti-Jewish racism is kind of, I think, all work. I just think that we should move away from the word anti-Semitism, because we also should name the hate that defines us. Why would we take a word used by those who hated us to describe our experience?
So one of our attendees just threw in another word, which obviously we don't have the time to go in, but you're right, there's many terms. What's important is to understand and have the discussion around it. So before I turn it back to Andrea, here's my question after reading the book. You talk about a movement for Jewish pride. After the last few days with some of the incidents and the criticism, where all too many of us in the Jewish community, never mind our allies, were too silent, too willing to accept that this is the norm. Perhaps movement isn't the right word. Perhaps what we need is a Jewish pride revolution. Do you think there's a difference? Are we ready for a revolution?
Oh, that's such a good question. A revolution. Yeah, I think in a way it is a revolution. And yeah, listen, word choice, you guys are free to use, like with Jew hate, you're free to use the words that you choose. And it is a bit of a revolution because we're throwing off chains. We're throwing off chains of shame, of trauma, of allowing our identity to be defined by others, about our experience being defined by others. So I think that is appropriate. And I often say that Jewish pride is a radical act of resistance. When I go, I mean, not necessarily in Hong Kong, but if I'm in the UK wearing my kippah, which I do every day, even though I'm not necessarily that religious, that's a resistance. That's me saying, I am here, I'm Jewish, I'm proud of it, I'm not going to hide, I'm not going to be ashamed. And that's it, full stop, right? So I think that it is a bit of a revolution. And I do think we need a radical change in our culture. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it online. There is, I started talking about Jewish pride in 2018. And I was told then, oh, we don't need this. People told me, keep your head down, which is a bit ironic, I think, actually. And now we've seen a groundswell. There are so many young people. There's so many people of all different age groups coming from all different countries saying, I'm really proud of being Jewish. And maybe I'm not white. Maybe I'm this, maybe I'm that. And listen, again, it doesn't really matter if a Jewish person says they're white. It's not something I would choose to say about myself, but that's fine. But it's about having the conversation and understanding why we think the way we do about ourselves. And that is the process of unpacking. That's the process of moving forward. So of course it's a revolution. I guess I didn't even think about using the word revolution. Maybe that would have scared people. But yeah, of course, it's radical and it's a revolution, but it can also be quiet. And someone said to me, are we going to have Mardi Gras? So obviously Mardi Gras is like an LGBTQ plus parade. Someone made a very funny joke and said, are we going to have Mardi Gras? And it's like, no, we don't need a Jewish parade. We have our own pride holidays. And what are they? They're Pesach, they're Rosh Hashanah, they're Shabbat, they're all of these things. And I'm saying this as a non-religious Jew. We have days built into our calendar weekly to celebrate our Jewishness. So it doesn't have to be a loud revolution in people's faces if that's not comfortable for people. This can be an internal thing as well, because physical safety is paramount. We don't want anyone to put themselves at risks. We don't want anyone to, wear a symbol which makes them visibly Jewish if that's going to make them, at risk of attack. But it can also just be lighting your Shabbat candles and engaging with our traditions, because the reality is that each of us is a thread in a much greater unbroken tapestry that stretches back 5,000 years. And we need to be actively Jewish to make sure that the tapestry continues to grow and evolve. So lighting the Shabbat candles does that. Having Seder. I had Seder with my non-Jewish partner and my non-Jewish friends. I was the only Jewish person there. And then we watched Prince of Egypt. But that is still engaging with our practice. And I think that's the most important. People have to be proud of being Jewish, because it's remarkable that we are Jews today in 2021 in Canada, from Scotland and Hong Kong, talking about Jewish identity is itself remarkable, because we're still here. Look at this enormous achievement. Look at what we have contributed to the world, and look at what we have to do. There's so much. We're going to continue to grow and evolve, and we're going to continue moving forward and have a revolution.
Wow. Thank you, Ben. I want to be part of the revolution. I thought it was great when Anita advised me earlier that would be her final question. I think that's a good place to end and a good step to kick off, that we move this revolution forward. I do urge everybody to read the book. I think it will affect people multi-generational. It could be read by a high school kid. It could be read by grandparents like myself. I really think it'll open your eyes. I think Ben has done an amazing job in covering all the aspects of our history that we need to think about and recognize, to be ourselves, to be proud Jews. So thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you, Anita. And everyone, stay well and happy. Continue to celebrate Pesach, and we'll talk again soon. Good evening.
Thanks so much. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.